Great. Okay. We are all set up. Okay. Hi, everybody. We're all here today to discuss your experience with open access publishing in celebration of Open Access Week this year. We've collected quite a panel of people here who have experience with open access in various capacities, and I just have a few questions that I would love to ask all of you guys and hear your thoughts and feedback so we can get some expert advice, as it were, from people who have experience in this realm, talking to people who might be interested in publishing open access in the future. So do you guys want to give a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure, I'll go first. I'm Dr. Genevieve Graff. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Work and the chair-elect of the mental health section for the American Public Health Association.
I'm Rebecca Malden. I am also an assistant professor at the School of Social Work at University of Texas at Arlington.
I'm Jen Murphy. I'm also an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at University of Texas at Arlington.
And I'm Dr. Sophia Pantis, an assistant professor at University of Texas at Arlington in the School of Social Work.
Perfect. All right. So I guess we can see how you guys all know each other.
Yeah, I will say one thing I will say about us all being from the same institution. The University of Texas at Arlington has always supported us publishing open access, and in the past has even at times provided us with funding in order to be able to do that for the journals that do charge when you choose that type of licensing option. So I think that's one reason that we've got a lot of experience with publishing open access.
The University of Texas also has a repository, so you can take any of your preprints of articles that have not been published in the journal as open access. You can take the preprint, and the University of Texas library system will put it in their open access repository so that your research can be open access, even if it isn't published in an open access journal. And Jennifer maybe didn't know that.
But now you do, and it's great. They will have a whole little section just for you and all of your work.
Oh, okay. I'm going to write that down.
Okay. So getting into my questions here. Do you guys want to discuss perhaps your experience with open access thus far? Like what drives you to be here discussing this topic today?
I'm going to let someone else go first on that.
I can go first. Mine's probably the smallest amount of experience. I've only published once open access. This is my first year on like the faculty side, and so I've never really had funding to do that, but my prior university had an agreement with a publishing company, so I was able to publish open access. But the reason that is important, but I was also thought a good reason to show up today was because when I was working in the field, I worked in schools and my research revolves around school mental health. And as a practitioner, you lose, right? You're in college, you're learning, you have so much access to all this information. And especially in social work, we talk about evidence-based practices and interventions. And then we're put out into the field and you can't access anything. So like if I would try to look up different interventions and look up research about things I was trying to do in practice, I kept hitting walls. So I think that's why I thought it was important to show up, was because, well, I've only done it a little, like I'm in a new position where there's more funding available to publish open access, and I know other ways to go about it, but especially that practice piece in our field is really important when you don't have that access. So that was important for me.
I think I can go next, and I think I agree a lot with what Jen said. I do a lot of healthcare ethics and things that are happening to medical social workers, healthcare chaplains, and a lot of them, if they're not a part of academic institutions, don't have access to those type of publications. And because my work really informs practice and really engages with practitioners who are in the field, who are at the hospitals, I thought that publishing open access can really get my materials to those who need it most, beyond just conferences and workshops and trying to engage them in different ways and disseminate my research in other ways. But in terms of that writing, making sure that it was available to those who need it most and who would benefit most from it. Unfortunately, with universities, right, a lot of people who use Google Scholar or just Google things don't have access to those type of things. And I will say, we can get into this later, but even at a university, it is really hard to access certain journals and certain manuscripts. And so I use the interlibrary loan all the time to get certain manuscripts that are not available within our institution. So I really like open access too, because it even helps me sometimes when I can't access one. I can go through interlibrary loan, but it might take a few days that I can actually access somebody else's manuscript. So in order to kind of give back and have that reciprocity, I think it's really important to publish open access too, even for academics who might be in, UTA's and R1, and we have a lot of resources, we have a lot of infrastructure, but even those at teaching hospitals who might have smaller library systems, they might not even be able to access ours, even if it's not open access, even if they're part of an academic institution. So being able to build that rigor, build that trustworthiness is really important to me as well, for those universities that may not have the same infrastructure that we do.
All right, I showed up because honestly, there are a few topics that I can get more passionate about than open access. And it's kind of been on my radar ever since I was a PhD student, and I graduated in 2018. So it's been a while. Back in, I'm going to guess 2016, I was editor of a student-run journal, and we published traditionally, where we got the license, we got the copyright turned over to us. We just published like most journals did. And even back then I was like, why are we doing this? Why don't we make this open access? Let the author retain their copyright, publish it, Creative Commons. So I started that conversation, which didn't happen in the time that I was editor, but I started that conversation and was pushing for it a lot. And then, obviously once you become an assistant professor, most of the choices are publish for free and have it behind a paywall, like Dr. Murphy and Dr. Fantis have been talking about, where the people that you really want to get it in the hands don't have it, or pay a tremendous amount of money. And yes, I don't know who the audience is for this discussion, but we're talking $2,000-3,000 is what the individual researcher needs to find those funds in order to get their article published. And that did not sit well with me. And I can talk at length about what I think about the commercial journal, the way in which the commercial journal industry has evolved to where it is right now, and what that means for both scholars and end users of the article. But then, and so that's an option, but you can also publish. There are journals that are spinning off. There are journals that are being created by researchers who are making it truly open so that there is no charge. They have to find their own way to fund their journal and make it a feasible enterprise, but you don't have to pay as an author, and you don't have to pay as an end user. And it's truly open access in all sorts of ways. And I recently got an email from ex-editor of a journal that I will not mention, who was like, hey, and he lists, these massive credentials, and I've been an editor of this journal for so long, but the entire editorial board and I just resigned. We're sick of this scheme, and we're creating our own open access journal in which there's no fees to publish. And so that whole conversation I'm really interested in. I'm also interested, like, if you want to publish open access, regardless if it's the pay to play version, pay to get published, or the truly open journal, you get this contract with like 3 or 4 different, like, multiple choices. Like, how do you want a license? You're paying your $3,000, now pick your license. And most people don't even know what those choices mean. And I have some information about that. And I was like, well, we can talk about that. Whatever you guys want to talk about, I have a dog in the hunt, and I'll be happy to share my opinions on it. So that's why I'm here.
Absolutely. would love to hear more about that. And Dr. Gratz?
My last thing is just, I mean, basically everything everyone's already said, which is that evidence-based practice really matters a lot in human service work. A lot of researchers are always concerned or wondering why the research isn't getting into practice more. And this paywall in terms of accessing research is just a really big piece of why research isn't being moved into practice. And so I think that if we care about evidence-based practice, we really have to engage in open access publishing as much as possible. And there's a lot of different ways to do it.
Yes. To that point, lots of different ways to do it. I wanted to know a little bit about, and you guys are all from the same institution of UTA. So do you know what UTA's open access policy is, or can speak more to that repository that was mentioned before? Like what are their policies regarding providing funding for these like gold open access publications?
Rebecca, I just feel like I feel like you're probably the most knowledgeable person about our institution on this, but
Until she's getting
so,
person.
yeah.
Chat.
We need, I mean, honestly, we need the definitive source, somebody from our Office of Research to answer this question. But there was a time at which there were actual funds that faculty could apply for, and I do not believe that is the case anymore. And so sometimes at an individual department level, the associate deans of research will have a pool of money, and some of them will decide to support publishing open access, but there is not a formal university-wide policy at the moment. Of course, that repository is something that takes institutional support. And so there is funding that's going into, maintaining the repository and having librarians who ensure that all of the like sometimes some journals will say, well, just take your accepted version. It doesn't even have to be a preprint. It can be your accepted version and you can upload it. Or, well, you can upload it, but here's the time. There may be an embargo and a certain amount of time. So the librarians will put effort into making sure that whatever's in your repository is meeting the requirements of the journal in which the article is ultimately published. So that's what I know as far as formal support. Do you guys have any other? Well, and then I will say, as far as creating open educational resources, there's tremendously supportive, but that's kind of another story. So I think we're talking about publishing journal articles, but if you want to create a book or any kind of teaching materials or anything and license them through Creative Commons and publish them through Math Open Press, then we've got tons of support for that. We even have scholars, like grants that will support that.
And I would say that it's important to know, because I don't think there's a policy on what journals are included in kind of open access forms that we could have free of charge because they are part of our university. Y'all might know, but I don't know where to find a list because I just got, this was months ago, but I got a paper accepted. And they're like, surprise, you can publish open access for free because your university is affiliated with it. And I was like, oh, great. Like, I didn't even know that before I submitted. And it's in a great, reputable, high impact factor journal. And it was fantastic. And it's been cited a ton. And I had no idea, it was a shock to me. I was going to use because there's no funding, I was going to use some of my research startup funds to cover it. But that would be like most of my research startup funds because for another conversation, open access has gotten very, very expensive for numerous journals. And so that was great. So I wonder I don't want to kibosh a new question, but I wonder if the university has a list of journals per area or discipline where they say we cover, this is included in our repository, or we cover the open access fees, because that would be great to know ahead of time to say, hey, I'm going to submit to this journal because I know that if it does get accepted, I can do open access that way, especially for those of us who are really committed to open access. So that sort of raises another question, but I think it's important to know when you're thinking about open access to really ask your librarians in your university which might be free of charge, because that might even help the submission process and where you should go if you want it to be open access but are worried about how much it costs and do not have that type of funding.
That's a great point. And that deal is with the University of Texas at Arlington. Like, they have gone with a specific publisher, and the publisher has like hundreds of journals. So as long as and it's one of those reputable publishers. So as long as you publish with one of theirs, and absolutely, because then you want to, like, you look at where do I want to submit, and you see these choices and can target something that's published by that company.
Yeah. And not to like complicate it or compound this conversation even further, but those who may not know is that Taylor and Francis just sold a bunch of articles to AI. Do you not know this? Am I allowed to put this in the chat in a recorded conversation that people might want to know? And so there's a question now too of open access and I guess like the ethical dialogue of AI use now, and AI being sort of integrated into journals and publications now. I'll find the article and try and put it on the chat, because I assume if people are listening to this, they might also be interested.
That is very interesting. I wonder, with all of these questions and various routes that people can take, what might be some advice you would have for new researchers just starting to publish, where they should look and what questions they should ask when beginning that process?
I would say one thing to just keep in mind is that you can always put open access costs into grant proposals, and I always recommend that people do that. You can use your startup funds for open access publishing. It's important to know what your institution supports. But I also love this no cost option where you can do the preprint repository through your institution if your institution supports that. But there's one other thing that I just wanted to mention too that's kind of related to this, and it's not necessarily new researchers, but I didn't know this. I was really shocked and happy about it, is that if you have NIH funding and you publish something under your NIH funding, there is a repository that NIH requires you to participate in. So anything that you publish that is attributed to a particular grant through the NIH is automatically going to become open access through the NIH repository, which I think is a newer development. And I think it's a wonderful development that people should keep in mind as well as another, of course, everyone likes to be funded by the NIH, but that's another reason that's another perk that comes with NIH funding.
And I don't know, I guess this is off topic. I don't know if it's NIH or who it is, but I know that some also require you to like have your data public, which
that is
I know
part
that's
of
not
NIH
journals,
funding now.
but I think that's also
fantastic
fantastic.
on it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which UTA also has infrastructure to support open access data as well. So if Rebecca wants to talk about it, she could.
Would you
like I
to?
said, well, I have a dog in every hunt, like I said, so you guys just tell me what you want this conversation to be.
Well, Rebecca, I would do think like for initial new researchers, your information that you were foreshadowing that you could share about kind of what the different things mean when you get these contracts from open access journals. I don't know that. I couldn't speak to that. And I think that would be a great resource to share if you can speak to that a little bit.
Okay, so I will make this a little bit short because you can spend, I mean, I've literally listened to people talk about this for an hour. So basically the licensing when something is open access it looks like a copyright sign, like the little C with a circle around it, except it's got 2 C's in it, and the 2 C's stand for Creative Commons. So if you just Google, what do Creative Commons license mean? Then you can look at the list and it will tell you. So there's all these little different add-ons. The very basic Creative Commons license is called CC BY, and the BY stands for tell me who this article is by if you're going to use any information in it. And it's really just telling people I still have the copyright on this. This is still my work, but I'm just giving you permission to use it in the way that you would like to use it without coming to me and asking for permission every time you want to reprint it, redistribute it, type of thing. In fact, if you want to remix it, as long as you just tell people it's from me, you have my permission. And then beyond that, if you want to add certain restrictions on, like if you want to say, hey, don't use this for commercial purposes, you can add that on. If you want to say, please don't slice and dice this, like it just needs to be in it. Like say you, for example, if you had a piece of art and you wanted only that artwork in its entirety to be used, you didn't want someone to take a piece of it out and put it into their own, in a collage or something like that, then you can say no derivatives from this. It has to be used exactly as is. So you get all these choices of, if you want to use this without coming to me for specific permission, I'm going to give you this carte blanche, but I'm going to tell you exactly how you can. And that's what all those different choices do. And so when you're confronted with it, just know that you can go from pretty wide open to fairly restrictive, and then just look up, and that's what, look up, and then you'll see what the choices be.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and the spirit of open access, people who are huge proponents of access are like CC BY, which means just take it and run, do what you want to with it. Just tell them I was the originator of it, is kind of like at the true heart of the matter. But there are reasons why you wouldn't necessarily want to do that. Like there may be some real reasons, like I do not want this commercialized. I just want to make sure that forever, in perpetuity, nobody's going to be making money off my work. So there's real reasons why you might choose different restrictions.
Any other thoughts to that kind of broad question I posed of advice for new researchers?
My advice is just do it if you can. I can't remember which one of you was alluding to. I think it was Dr. Fantas, how many citations you can get. So you really do get a sense of this journal article is having impact in a way that maybe one that wasn't openly accessible wouldn't. And then it just it's a nice little entree into the spirit of open science too. So like making your findings available, making your data available, being as transparent as you can, like all of those things. I think it's just a really nice way for beginning researchers to start, exploring all of that.
And I think to add to that, and something this might be obvious to some folks, but it might be new to newer researchers, is that you don't have to make that determination right away, right? When you're submitting your article, you don't have to know, oh, do I have the funds right now to pay for open access? Once it's accepted, once it's approved, then you can make that decision or try and gather the funds or try and apply for a quick thing of funding or something for that specific article if you get a revise and resubmit or something like that. But that's a decision that always say that you're interested in open access, but you don't have to necessarily make that determination when you're submitting your manuscript. So that might seem really obvious, but I think it's important to remember that there's still time, sometimes years, until once manuscript's reviewed, right? We all know that, but there might be time in which you can gather some funds, or maybe your research, you have a 2,000 and you just need an extra 1,000, and maybe you work with somebody or you have a co-author who also has some research funding and you decide to put it together. So there are ways that you can do it while your manuscript's under review. So, you don't have to think about it or have all your ducks in a row right away. I think that's also really important. And I will say that if you are thinking about open access, to just really, this might be a whole other conversation around predatory publishing, but just to be really conscientious and do your research around good, reliable journals.
Reputable journals.
Yes.
Should we talk about Beall's List?
Yeah, does it still, because he took it down?
No, it's back up. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
So yeah, check out Beall's List, because you'll see a lot of open access journals which have very high impact factors that are not reputable, that are predatory. If you're a researcher or a new researcher who has published and you've received those emails saying, hey, Dr. Dada, if you want to publish in this journal, we have an impact factor of 10, come here. Those are most likely predatory journals. And so you definitely don't want to publish in those. So when it comes to open access, it's really important to look at the reputable journals that publish both, or that open access is available, but it's not necessarily there, because there are open access journals specifically for open access that are still reputable and good. But then there are ones that are not. So the open access world also raises a whole host of questions on how to navigate that as well that you should be aware of.
That is such
That's
a good
really
point.
Good information.
One small tidbit, just like, let's assume you have gotten accepted and you want to publish in a reputable journal that charges an open access fee. I think another thing that's important to know is that it could be negotiable with what the fee is. So editors have a discretion of waiving the fee entirely, and they certainly have a discretion of reducing the amount. So if in the situation that Dr. Fantas was talking about, where you've got 2,000, but they're charging 3, you could just ask, I've got 2,000. Is that good enough? And it may well be that they'll take that.
I've never done that before. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. That's so smart. Yeah, they might, or they might have different fees too, depending on your institution. So with some that I've had is you put in your institution, or they know where you are because you've submitted the manuscript, and they'll tell you what the fee is based on it. So there are some where I think, I haven't heard this directly, but where you might be kind of a lower resource school or less infrastructure, and there might be a different cost point to it, depending where you are geographically or your school. So also know that, you know, you might get different prices. And I'm not sure whether this is important, but for those who are thinking about open access, I think it's important to know that there are some that are, you might be being like, how much does it cost right now, right? And I think it can be, there's a big spectrum, but I think at least what I've seen, and I hope my colleagues can chime in, is anywhere from like 2,500 to like 4,000. I've seen 5,000 almost with some. So when you're thinking about open access and you're like, oh yeah, I have a couple of $100 for research development, that should be great. It's not enough these days. Or if you're thinking about applying to a grant, I usually go on the upper end and ask for about like 5 or 6. And that way maybe I could get 2 pubs out of it, but I would have enough where if I wanted a high impact factor journal that has a high open access cost, I can still afford it.
I guess to kind of close out the discussion here, I would like to know, what are your thoughts on the future of open access? What would you like to see, and what do you expect to see? What do you think we can do to make that vision a reality?
I'll just hop in, although I don't know if my background noise is too annoying, but I think that we're just moving more and more towards open access. I think that's becoming more and more popular. I see more and more really highly reputable paywall journals that are now like adding an arm or an alternative that's an open access sister journal. And so I see that, I think it's just becoming more and more common. And as we see institutions like NIH and other universities investing more in making sure that the research that's generated under their funding or under their by their faculty is accessible. I think we're just going to see that grow more and more, but it's going to be really important in that process to be discerning and to be aware of like predatory open access journals versus not predatory open access journals. And I think that the presence of those forces is going to muddy the waters as we move forward.
For me, I think open access is great. What I would envision or like to see is more equity involved in open access. So there might be researchers who are doing really incredible work who don't have grant funding or don't need grant funding to do their work, who don't come from strong infrastructure universities, who don't have research development funds, who can't afford basically to publish in open access journals. And so then it really kind of, for me at least, in the ethics around that, creates this kind of bubble of who is publishing open access versus who isn't. And it concerns me if it's going to be the same bubble of researchers who have grants, who have high funding, who are come from R1 universities, who continuously are able to publish in open access journals. So I would like to say, I don't know whether it's going to be possible in terms of the business of publishing, but I would like to see more equity involved. I think open access is great. I think the values behind open access are really important in terms of making it more accessible and available for those who don't have access, but then it puts the onus and the burden on individual researchers who may not have the funds, the resources, and the support in order to do so, leaving them having to have paywalls. And as more and more things get open access, fewer and fewer individuals are going to use those paywalls. And so that would be my fear around it. And I hope that we can find a way to sort of make sure that we are doing our best to have a comprehensive representation of scholars across the field being able to publish in open access.
Yeah, I'll let Rebecca close it out. So I'll just add a small note that, I mean, I am really new in the field, and so I've learned a lot just by this session. So I think it sounds like a lot of infrastructure is built out across universities and especially at UTA, but that knowledge base still isn't there. So having that infrastructure and the people who are supporting that infrastructure like push it out and advocate for open access and inform faculty and students who are interested in publishing what exists and what supports they have, at least for me, that would be very beneficial.
Oh, Dr. Malden, your sound is off.
Thank you. I think that's a really nice segue into one of the things I was thinking about as far as my vision and the fact that like it's on the universities in so many ways, either to build the infrastructures to support their faculty publishing OER. But if you think about it, it's like the funding, the money is coming from the university to publish. The universities are having to pay the fees to get access to the journals for the ones that aren't open access. The universities are basically paying their faculty members to do the peer reviews and to edit the journals that are then making the profit off these journal articles. And if you think about how much money any individual university or consortium of universities is paying toward the enterprise of publishing journal articles, they could take that money and they could have their own non-for-profit journals in-house that are all open access and nobody's paying any fees, just like the one that I said I recently published in, or the one where the editorial board just resigned to start their own journal. Like that to me would be the vision. I don't know that that's in the future, but I think if we hold that vision and we're willing to work and put our volunteer efforts into something along those lines, I think we can make a big difference and we could be seeing the more equitable access that we're all talking about.
Thank you so much, guys, for having this discussion. I know I have learned a lot, so I'm really excited to get this put out and see what the rest of people have to say. As a student, I'm really excited to move forth into this world in the future and see what it has to offer. So I really appreciate you guys being here and discussing this.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Kaylee, for putting this together. I just want to say thank you to all of our other guests that showed up very last minute, and I really appreciate it. I think this was a really great conversation, and I really appreciate the support for Open Access Week. Kaylee, I just want to make this note that I think we're going to edit this out now, but I think maybe you should just bill it as like, as you know, junior faculty from the School of Social Work at University of Texas talk about open access publishing, because it would just look weird if we don't just come out and be like, yeah, this was a UTA thing. Plus, it'll be cool for us.
Yeah, and I will send you guys the note on the letterhead that from HBHA as well.
So we can all remember to put it on our CV. Guys, now we can put it on like one more thing on that CV for tenure. It's really going to push us over the edge.
That one, exactly.
On my service statement.
Well, Kaylee, if you edit and you want to edit me out, feel free. I know I get a little bit long-winded, so it's not going to offend me if you like chop out some parts or something.
I think all of this information was really beautiful. I probably will cut out some random pauses and stuff.
I held back so much. I was like, there's so much I want to say.
Did you? Okay, put it in now, and then Kaylee can.
Yeah,
insert it
sure.
back in.
Any last thoughts?
Give us a rant.
No, I have no last thought.
Yes, you know. Look, I put the link in the chat. It's great.
That's true. I'm going to
Right.
include that link in the description.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Wonderful.
should. Because
Good
people
idea.
don't know about it, and Taylor and Francis never sent messages or anything. And
Hit
it's
stop recording.
Awesome. All right.